The girl lay half-hidden in the shallow ditch as if the earth itself had tried to swallow the evidence. Evan Cole saw her too late, just a flicker at the edge of his rearview mirror, a pale shape against red sand and scrub. For one breath, his hand stayed on the wheel. His mind did what it had been trained to do for years: calculate, conserve, survive, keep driving. Because the gas gauge was resting on a lie. Because his phone had no bars. Because the last repair job of the day had paid him in wrinkled bills and apologies. Because Maya's school lunch needed groceries, not heroics. Because the world, in Evan's experience, punished men who stopped. Then he heard it. Faint, stubborn, absurd in the empty evening. A phone ringing somewhere in the dirt. A bright human sound that didn't belong out here. Evan's throat tightened. He tapped the brakes, slow at first, like he was negotiating with himself. The desert wind pushed at his truck, hot and gritty, carrying the smell of sage and sun-baked metal. His trailer, a patched-up mobile repair rig, rattled behind him like an old promise refusing to break. He pulled over. The engine ticked as it cooled, and the silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush a man's resolve. Evan stepped out into the heat. His shirt was damp along the spine, stained with grease at the cuffs. A faded patch on his tool bag read, "Coal," letters worn down by years of being rubbed against doors, engines, and disappointment. He stood there for a heartbeat, staring at the ditch as if it might speak first. It didn't. It only held her. He moved without fully deciding, boots crunching gravel, knees bending at the edge. A smear of blood had darkened the sand into something almost black. The phone's ringtone had stopped, but the glow of its screen pulsed weakly beneath her shoulder like a dying ember. She was young, early 20s maybe, long dark hair tangled with dust, a shallow cut at the hairline, and bruising that didn't belong to an accident, too patterned, too deliberate. Her lips were pale, not the pale of fear, the pale of a body losing the argument with the world. Evan's hands hovered, then settled, 2 fingers to the side of her neck. A pulse, thin, thread-like. But there, the old part of him, buried under bills, under shame, under the word disgraced, rose up as if it had never left. The medic. The man who once carried strangers out of chaos because that was the oath, that was the job, that was the only way he knew how to be useful. "Hey," he said softly, as if the sound of his voice could anchor her. "Stay with me. You hear me?" No response. Her breathing came in broken, shallow sips. He checked her airway, tilted her head carefully, watching for the reflex that would tell him she was still fighting. He saw defensive wounds along her forearms, thin cuts and bruises, the kind you get when you raise your hands to protect your face. Something inside Evan went cold and clear. This wasn't a crash. This was a discard. Evan glanced at the horizon. The sky was bleeding into orange and violet, the sun slipping behind low hills as if it was tired of watching what people did to each other. The highway around him was empty. No headlights, no distant hum. He thought of Maya, 7 years old, sharp-eyed, too grown for her age in the quiet ways that broke a father's heart. Waiting for him in their trailer parked behind a rundown lot, probably finishing her homework at the fold-out table. Probably trying not to ask if they could have eggs tomorrow because she'd learned that questions sometimes hurt. He thought of the cash in his pocket, $63. He had counted it twice, like counting would make it more. 63 to stretch until Friday, and yet his hands were already moving. He ran back to his truck and yanked open the passenger door. Under the seat, wrapped in an old towel, was the kit he told himself he kept just in case. In truth, it was a relic of the life he'd lost, the life that had been stripped from him when a report turned into a headline, and a headline turned into a verdict. He tore it open. Gauze, tape, shears, an expired oxygen mask, a pulse oximeter with a cracked screen. It would have to be enough. He returned to her, kneeling in the dirt. His fingers worked with a steadiness he didn't feel. Pressure to the bleeding, quick scan for fractures. Listen, really listen, to the way her lungs sounded when she tried to inhale. There was a faint crackle and her ribs rose unevenly. Internal injury, possibly a pneumothorax, possibly worse. He swallowed hard, tasting dust and fear. "Okay," he murmured, not to her, but to himself. "Okay, Evan." Not thinking, doing. He slid an arm behind her shoulders, bracing her head, lifting with care. She was too light. The kind of light that made you angry, because it meant someone had taken too much from her already. As he carried her to the truck, his muscles screamed. The desert wind slapped at his face, and in his mind a different sound rose, distant and sharp, like an old door swinging open, the echo of a courtroom, the echo of a board meeting, the echo of someone saying, "You are no longer authorized." He set her into the passenger seat and buckled her in with trembling hands. The phone, now silent, lay smeared with blood on the floor mat. He didn't even think to wipe it. He only slammed the door, ran around, and fired the engine to life. The truck roared like it was furious at the world. Evan's eyes stayed on the road, but his attention split into 100 pieces, watching her chest rise and fall, watching the sky dim, watching the speedometer climb. Every bump in the asphalt made her wince. Every time her breathing faltered, his heart seemed to stop with it. "Stay with me," he said again. "You don't get to quit on me. Not now." There was a small rural clinic 30 minutes out, if the map in his head was still correct. 30 minutes if he didn't get pulled over. 30 minutes if the road held. 30 minutes if she stayed alive. And because life was cruel, his mind showed him Maya's face as clearly as if she were sitting in the back seat. The way she looked at him when she was afraid but trying not to be. The way she trusted him with a faith he hadn't always deserved. Evan tightened his grip on the wheel. He had once promised himself that he would never stop for anyone again, that he would protect the only person he had left, that he would keep their fragile life small, quiet, survivable. But the ditch had chosen him, and now, with the last light bleeding out of the sky, Evan Cole drove toward the clinic as if he could outrun every mistake he'd ever made, unaware that somewhere behind them, in the deepening dusk, a black SUV had already turned onto the highway, following the trail of red dust he left behind, and drawing closer. And that was only the beginning. The clinic lights were too bright for a place so small. They buzzed overhead with that thin, fluorescent cruelty that made every bruise look worse and every fear feel exposed. The waiting room smelled of antiseptic, burnt coffee, and something older, like worn vinyl chairs, had absorbed years of prayers and left them behind in the seams. Evan carried her through the sliding doors with his shoulders locked and his breath ragged. A nurse hurried forward, her face shifting from irritation to alarm the moment she saw the girl's color. "Sir, put her here. Now." A gurney appeared like mercy on wheels. Hands, gloved, practiced, lifted the girl away from Evan's arms. For a second his palms stayed curved in the air, still holding the ghost of her weight. "What happened?" a doctor demanded, already moving with the gurney. "Found her in a ditch," Evan said. His voice came out steady, which startled him. "No car, no wallet. She was bleeding from the head and breathing shallow. I think ribs, maybe internal." The doctor's gaze flicked over him. Grease-stained shirt, dusty boots, eyes too alert for a man who looked broke. Evan recognized that look, the one that measured worth before urgency. "Name?" a nurse asked. Evan hesitated. I don't know." The girl's eyelids fluttered. Her lips trembled. A sound, barely a syllable, escaped. "Something like L?" Then her eyes rolled back and the room surged. "Trauma bay, move!" The doctor's voice snapped like a command. The curtain swallowed her. Evan stood there, suddenly useless, blood drying dark on his forearm. The adrenaline that had carried him across that highway drained out through his boots, leaving him hollow. He leaned against the wall, his shoulder blades pressing into chipped paint. His phone buzzed, one bar flickering in and out like a dying heartbeat. A text from Mrs. Danner, their neighbor who watched Maya when Evan took late calls. "Maya ate. She's asleep. She asked if you were okay." Evan stared at the words until they blurred. He typed with thumbs that wouldn't stop shaking. "I'm okay. Tell her I love her. I'll be home soon." He didn't believe the last sentence. Not fully. Because the truth was, he had no idea what home even meant anymore. He'd dragged danger into it the moment he turned his truck around. Minutes passed that felt like hours carved from bone. A receptionist called his attention. "Sir, I need you to fill this out." Paperwork, of course. The world always asked for paper while people bled. The form wanted everything. Patient name, address, insurance, emergency contact. Evan held the pen above the blank line and felt the absurdity of it. How do you write the name of someone whose life you just borrowed from death? "She doesn't have anything on her," he said quietly. The receptionist sighed. the sound of a person already tired of strangers' tragedies. Then we list you as contact until family is found. I'm not her family, Evan said. The woman's eyes narrowed. Are you refusing responsibility? That word, responsibility, hit him like a punch. Evan tasted old anger, old humiliation. He remembered the board hearing years ago, the way men in suits had spoken about him like he was a tool that had malfunctioned, the way his license had been taken, not because he was careless, but because he was convenient to blame. He looked down at the form again, looked at the line where a name was supposed to make a person real. Outside the trauma bay curtain, a faint sound rose, an uneven coughing, then a monitor's quickened beep. Evan signed. Evan Cole. In that moment, he didn't realize he was anchoring himself to her fate. He only knew that abandoning her on paper felt too much like leaving her in that ditch. The receptionist slid another page over. Initial here, and here. Evan's pocket felt suddenly heavy with the cash he'd counted twice before leaving home, $63. The emergency cushion he told himself was enough to keep his world from collapsing. He slid it onto the counter when asked for payment. The bills were damp with sweat, soft at the corners from being folded and unfolded. The receptionist counted them without expression, then stamped something that sounded final. Balance remaining will be billed, she said. Evan almost laughed. Billed to what? His empty account? The trailer that belonged more to Russ than to him? His name already carried debt like a shadow. He found a seat in the waiting room and sat down hard, elbows on his knees. Across from him, a man in a work uniform slept with his head against the wall. An older woman clutched a rosary, lips moving soundlessly. A toddler played with a paper cup like it was a toy. Life continued in small, indifferent motions. Evan's eyes drifted to his hands. The blood wasn't all his. It smeared beneath his fingernails and along the creases of his knuckles. He scrubbed at it with a tissue until the skin burned. It didn't come clean. Maybe it never would. Hours later, well past midnight, the doctor finally emerged. He was in his 50s, tired-eyed with the posture of someone who had been holding other people's endings for too long. She's alive, he said. Evan stood so fast his chair scraped the floor. Alive? Barely, when she arrived. You did the right things out there. The doctor studied him. You have training. Evan's jaw tightened. I used to. The doctor nodded as if he understood more than he should. Concussion, 2 cracked ribs. Internal bleeding, controlled, but... He paused, choosing his words like they were fragile. The bruising pattern suggests assault, not an accident. Evan felt his stomach drop. The part of him that still believed the world had limits snapped quietly. Can I see her? He asked. Not yet. She's sedated. We stabilized her, but she needs a hospital with imaging and a surgical team on standby. We're arranging transport. Evan's mind leapt instantly to the cost, the paperwork, the questions. She doesn't have ID, Evan said. No family, no insurance. You're going to ask me again, aren't you? The doctor's gaze softened in a way that made Evan uncomfortable. We're going to do what we can regardless. But yes, someone has to sign for transfer. Evan looked past the doctor into the hallway where the trauma curtain still hung like a boundary between 2 lives. He thought of Maya asleep in their trailer, small and trusting. He thought of that black SUV he'd imagined in the darkness behind him on the highway, and the way the girl's injuries looked too intentional to be random. His voice came out low. If I sign, I'm responsible for everything. Legally, the doctor said, you're already involved. Evan swallowed, tasting dust and inevitability. He didn't know her name. He didn't know what she'd been running from, but he knew this. Someone had left her to die, and people like that didn't stop at one attempt. He took the pen, he signed again, and as the ink dried, Evan felt the invisible door swing wider, into a world where powerful men didn't lose what they wanted, and where a broke single father with a repaired engine and a stubborn heart could become the easiest target. Outside, in the parking lot, headlights glided slowly past the clinic windows, then paused, just long enough to feel like a watchful stare, before disappearing into the night. And Evan realized the rescue might have been the easy part. Morning arrived quietly, the way bad news often does, without apology. Evan woke in the clinic chair with a stiff neck and a mouth that tasted like pennies. For a moment he didn't know where he was. Then the beeping reached him, slow and measured, and memory slid back into place with a dull weight. The ditch, the blood, the pen in his hand signing lines he hadn't read. He straightened and rubbed his face. The waiting room was thinner now, fewer bodies, fewer stories. Outside, the sky had faded from night into a washed-out blue that looked too clean for what had happened beneath it. A nurse approached, carrying a clipboard and a paper cup of coffee that smelled like mercy. "She's awake," she said, a little confused. "The doctor wants to speak with you first." Evan followed her down the narrow hall. Each step echoed too loudly. He wondered if this was how judgment always sounded, your own footsteps, magnified. The doctor stood outside a curtained room, glasses low on his nose. "She regained consciousness about 10 minutes ago," he said. "She's oriented to place mostly, not to time, and not to herself." "What does that mean?" Evan asked. "It means trauma-induced amnesia," the doctor replied. "It can be temporary, or not. She remembers facts, language, how to speak, just not the events surrounding the assault, or her identity." Evan felt something twist in his chest. "She doesn't know who she is." "She knows she was hurt," the doctor said gently. "And she knows you." That startled him. "She does?" The doctor nodded toward the curtain. "She asked for the man who stayed." Evan pushed the curtain aside. The room was small and pale, washed in morning light filtered through cheap blinds. She lay propped against pillows, an IV taped to her arm, a monitor ticking softly beside her like a patient metronome. Her face looked different in daylight, less ghostly, more human. Bruises bloomed along her cheekbone and jaw, yellow and purple like ugly flowers. Her eyes found him immediately. They were dark, steady, searching. "You came back," she said. Her voice was rough, unused. Evan stopped just inside the room, unsure where to put his hands. "Yeah," he said. "I did." She studied him as if memorizing his face for later. "I thought I dreamed you." He shook his head. "Not a dream." A pause settled between them, careful and fragile. "What's your name?" she asked. "Evan," he said. "Evan Cole." She nodded once as if filing it away. "I don't have one," she said quietly. The words hit harder than he expected. "You will," Evan said. "It'll come back." She looked down at her hands, pale against the white sheets. "The doctor says that like it's a promise." Evan pulled the chair closer and sat, keeping a respectful distance. "I don't make promises I can't keep," he said. "But I've seen memory do strange things. Sometimes it hides to protect you." Her lips curved faintly. "From what?" He didn't answer. Some truths were too sharp for daylight. A nurse slipped in, checked her vitals, then retreated. The room settled again. Outside, a gurney rolled past. Someone laughed down the hall, too loudly, like they were afraid of silence. She broke it first. "Why did you stop?" Evan's brow furrowed. "Stop?" "On the road," she said. "You could have kept driving." He looked at the floor, at his boots, at the scuffed edge of the bed. "I almost did." Her eyes didn't leave him. "But you didn't." He shrugged. "My kid wouldn't have liked it." That earned a flicker of surprise. "You have a child?" "A daughter," he said. "Maya. She's 7. The girl's gaze softened, something unguarded slipping through the pain. "She must be brave." "She is," Evan said. "Braver than me." She smiled then, small, tentative, but real. It felt like a sunrise that didn't ask permission. The doctor returned with paperwork. Transport was scheduled for the afternoon. A larger hospital, more tests, more questions. "She needs a name for the transfer," the doctor said. The girl's fingers curled into the blanket. Panic flashed across her face, quick and raw. "I don't know." Evan spoke before he thought better of it. "Ellie." They both looked at him. "Ellie?" she repeated. "It's temporary," Evan said. "Just something to put on the form. You can change it when the rest comes back." She tried the name like a coat. "Ellie," she said again. It fit better than she expected. "Okay." The doctor nodded and wrote it down. Ellie. When the room emptied, Evan stood to leave. He had to check on Maya. He had to move the trailer. He had to think, really think, about what came next. "I'll be back," he said. Ellie's hand shot out, stopping just short of touching his sleeve. She hesitated, then let it fall. "You're not going to disappear, are you?" Evan met her eyes and saw fear there, not of pain, but of abandonment, the kind that lingered long after bruises faded. "No," he said firmly. "I'm not." As he stepped into the hallway, his phone buzzed in his pocket. One message, no sender ID, just a location pin dropped near the clinic and a single line beneath it. "We know you stopped." Evan's pulse hammered as he slipped the phone away. Behind him, Ellie lay staring at the ceiling, holding onto a borrowed name like a lifeline, unaware that somewhere beyond the clinic walls, her real name was already moving through the world, whispered in rooms where men didn't forgive loose ends, and where Evan Cole's quiet life was about to be found. Evan moved the trailer before the sun climbed high enough to expose him. He hitched it to the truck just after dawn, hands working on muscle memory while his mind replayed the message he hadn't shown anyone. "We know you stopped. No name, no threat, just certainty." He didn't drive far, only 20 miles west, far enough that the clinic sat behind him like a bad dream, and close enough that he could still get back if Ellie's condition changed. He parked behind an abandoned feed store, the kind of place that still smelled like grain and ghosts. The lot was hidden from the road by a row of cottonwoods, their leaves rattling in the morning wind like nervous applause. Maya was awake when he returned. She sat cross-legged at the small fold-out table inside the trailer, coloring with the careful focus of a child who understood that quiet could be a kind of help. She looked up when Evan stepped in, her eyes sharp and searching. "You're late," she said. "I know." He crouched to her level. "I'm sorry." She studied his face, then his hands. "You're bleeding again." Evan glanced down. A thin cut along his knuckle had reopened. He hadn't felt it. "It's nothing." "That's what you say when it's something," Maya replied. He smiled despite himself. "You didn't get that from me." She shrugged. "Mrs. Danner says adults lie to make things easier." Evan winced. "Mrs. Danner talks too much." Maya stood and hugged him anyway, arms tight around his middle. He held her longer than usual, breathing in the familiar scent of soap and crayons. This was the line he couldn't let anyone cross. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly. She pulled back but didn't let go. "Am I in trouble?" "No." He shook his head. "You did nothing wrong." "Is someone else?" she asked. Evan hesitated, then chose the truth, trimmed to a size a 7-year-old could carry. "I helped someone last night. She was hurt." Maya's eyes widened. "Like when you used to help people before?" "Yes," Evan said. "Like that." "Is she okay?" "She's getting there." Maya considered this. "Is she nice?" He almost laughed. "I think so." "Then she can stay," Maya said decisively. Evan blinked. "Stay?" "With us," Maya clarified, gesturing around the trailer. "People who are hurt need somewhere safe." "That's what you told me when my knee got all messed up." "That was different." "How?" "Because this time, someone powerful was hunting her. Because safety was a fragile thing that broke under the weight of money and influence. Because love, once extended, could become a weapon." Evan looked at his daughter and saw the unyielding logic of kindness. "She might need help for a while," he said carefully. Maya nodded as if this settled the matter. "I can give her my blanket, the blue one." Something inside Evan cracked, soft and painful. "Let's see what the doctors say." By late afternoon, the call came. Ellie was stable enough to leave the clinic, but not ready for a hospital transfer yet. The imaging had raised questions that required specialists, insurance, approvals that moved slower than blood loss. The doctor spoke cautiously, choosing words that meant delay without saying danger. "She can be discharged into your care," he said, "if you're willing." Evan closed his eyes. He was willing. That was the problem. An hour later, he pulled back into the clinic parking lot. Ellie waited by the entrance in borrowed clothes that didn't quite fit. Soft gray sweats, a hoodie too large for her frame. She looked smaller without the bed, more breakable. Her eyes found him instantly. "You came," she said, relief threading her voice. I said I would. The nurse handed him a thin packet of papers and a bag of medications. She needs rest, no stress. Follow-ups are listed here. No stress, Evan thought grimly. Ellie climbed into the truck carefully, wincing. She glanced at the trailer in the mirror as they pulled onto the highway. That's where you live? Yeah. With your daughter? Yes. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, softly, thank you for not leaving me alone. The trailer felt even smaller with Ellie inside. Maya watched from the table as Evan helped Ellie up the steps. Their eyes met, curious, measuring. Maya broke the silence first. You can have my bed, she said. I'll sleep with my dad. Ellie's throat worked. That's very kind. Maya shrugged. You look like you need it more. That night, as the trailer settled into sleep, Evan sat by the narrow window, watching the road through a slit in the curtains. Ellie slept fitfully, murmuring in dreams she couldn't remember. Maya breathed steadily beside him, one hand curled into his shirt like an anchor. Headlights appeared in the distance, slow, deliberate. They passed once, then again. A black SUV. It didn't stop. It didn't need to. Evan's hand tightened on the edge of the table as the vehicle disappeared down the road, leaving dust and certainty behind. The trailer hadn't asked questions, but the world outside had started to answer them, and Evan knew the hiding was already failing. Ellie woke screaming. The sound tore through the trailer just before dawn, sharp and panicked, the kind that came from somewhere deeper than pain. Evan was on his feet instantly, heart already racing, every sense dragging him back into older nights he'd sworn were over. It's okay, he said, reaching her side. You're safe. You're safe. Ellie sat upright, hands clawed into the blanket Maya had given her, chest heaving as if she'd run miles instead of dreams. Her eyes darted around the cramped space, walls too close, ceiling too low, until they landed on him. They were there, she whispered. In the dark. Maya stirred on the fold-out couch. Bad dream? She asked sleepily. Ellie nodded, shame flushing her face. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to wake you. Maya pushed herself up and crossed the floor without hesitation, handing Ellie the blue blanket. It helps, she said simply. It smells like home. Ellie took it with shaking hands. Thank you. Evan watched the exchange with a heaviness that had nothing to do with exhaustion. Children understood things adults complicated. Kindness to Maya wasn't a risk, it was a rule. When the sun finally rose, it did so quietly, pale light filtering through the thin curtains. Ellie sat at the table with a mug of soup Evan had reheated, cradling it like it might disappear. Her hands trembled slightly. I remember more, she said suddenly. Evan looked up from the sink. What kind of more? Pieces. She closed her eyes, concentrating. A building with glass everywhere, men in suits, security badges. Her brow furrowed. I was supposed to give a speech, or attend something important. Maya leaned forward. Were there snacks? Ellie almost smiled. Yes, fancy ones. Evan felt the tension coil in his gut. Do you remember your last name? Ellie shook her head. Not yet, but I remember being watched, followed. I remember thinking I shouldn't get into the car. Her fingers tightened around the mug. I did anyway. Evan's jaw clenched. That's not your fault. She looked at him sharply. You don't know that. He met her gaze, steady. I know enough. By midday, the feed store lot had begun to feel exposed. Evan made the call he'd been avoiding, to a man named Harris who ran an auto yard 2 towns over, the kind of man who asked fewer questions than most. You can park behind the south fence, Harris said. Week, maybe 2. Thanks, Evan replied. I owe you. Harris snorted. Everyone does. They moved the trailer again just before dusk. Maya helped, buckling cabinets, securing loose items. Ellie sat in the passenger seat, watching the road like it might turn on her. Halfway there, Evan noticed the car, 2 vehicles back, dark, unfamiliar. It kept its distance perfectly, neither aggressive nor careless. Evan took a turn he didn't need to. The car followed. His hands tightened on the wheel. He forced his breathing slow. Panic would get them killed faster than anything else. Maya, he said calmly, I need you to put your seatbelt on tighter. It is tight, she said. tighter. Ellie's eyes met his in the mirror. Understanding flickered there, quick and terrible. They found us. Not yet, Evan said, and maybe not. He turned into a narrow side road, then another, dust pluming behind them. The dark car slowed, hesitated, then turned away. Silence flooded the cab. Maya exhaled. Was that a race? No, Evan said softly. That was someone looking. That night, Ellie finally remembered her name. It came to her in a whisper, like saying it too loud might summon something worse. Eleanor, she said. Eleanor Vale. The air went still. Evan sat down slowly. The name carried weight. Even Maya felt it, her playful energy dimming. My father is Richard Vale, Eleanor continued, voice steady now. Vale Dynamics, defense contracts, medical tech, infrastructure. Evan had heard of him. Everyone had. They didn't kidnap me for money, Eleanor said. They wanted leverage, and when it didn't work, they decided I was a liability. Maya's hand slipped into Evan's. They'll come back, Eleanor said. For me, or for you, or for her. Evan looked at the two girls, one bound to him by blood, the other by choice. He thought of the life he'd built by staying small, invisible. He thought of the ditch and the pulse beneath his fingers. Then we stop running, he said quietly. Eleanor stared at him. You can't fight them. Evan didn't raise his voice. He didn't posture. He only spoke the truth he'd learned the hard way. I don't have to win, he said. I just have to last. Outside, far beyond the fence line, an engine idled and then shut off. Someone had found the right place to wait, and waiting, Evan knew, was how powerful people made you pay for being seen. They didn't come that night. Evan stayed awake anyway. He sat at the small table with the lights off, the trailer held together by moonlight and breath. The rifle rested against the wall within reach, not because he believed it could stop what was coming, but because holding it kept his hands from shaking. Outside, the auto yard slept behind its fence of bent wire and rusted promise. Somewhere beyond that, the highway hummed like a living thing that never learned to rest. Maya slept curled against the couch cushions, her blue blanket wrapped tight. Eleanor lay on the narrow bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling as if it might confess something useful. They'll wait, Eleanor said quietly, not turning her head. Evan didn't pretend not to understand. That's what people with options do, she nodded. They let time work for them. Fear, exhaustion, mistakes. And when that doesn't work, Evan asked, they make an example. Morning came thin and gray. Evan cooked eggs from the last carton and cut toast into squares that felt like a ceremony. He watched the girls eat, memorizing the small things, the way Maya hummed without realizing it, the way Eleanor held her fork like she was afraid to drop it. The world outside the trailer felt closer than it had the day before, as if the fence had leaned in overnight. A knock came just after 9. Not a pound, not a threat. A knock that assumed it would be answered. Evan's spine went rigid. He met Eleanor's eyes. She gave the smallest shake of her head. Not yet. I'll get it, Evan said, keeping his voice level. He opened the door to a man who didn't belong to the yard. Crisp shirt, expensive shoes made to look casual, a smile that arrived before warmth. Mr. Cole, the man said, as if they were old acquaintances. I'm Thomas Reed. Evan didn't offer his hand. I'm here on behalf of parties who are concerned, Reed continued, about the young woman in your care. She has a name, Evan said. Reed's smile tightened. Of course. Eleanor. Maya shifted behind Evan. Eleanor went very still. We want to help, Reed said. Get her somewhere appropriate, safe, with resources you can't possibly provide. You mean controlled, Evan replied. Reed spread his hands. You're a reasonable man. This situation has outgrown you. There's compensation for your trouble. He slid a card forward, then another, this one heavier. A cashier's check. Evan didn't look at the number. You're offering money so I stop existing in this story, Evan said. Reed chuckled softly as if indulging a child. I'm offering a way back to quiet. For you. For your daughter. Maya's fingers dug into Evan's shirt. Eleanor spoke for the first time. They won't stop if I go with you. Reed turned, surprised. Miss Vale? They already decided what I cost them, Eleanor said. You're here to tidy up. Reed's smile faded. You're injured, confused. This isn't your call. Evan stepped between them, the space closing. You should leave. Reed held his gaze, then nodded once. Patience, he said, is a courtesy we extend. He left without raising his voice, without turning back. The yard felt smaller after. Evan packed. Not clothes, truths. He made calls he'd avoided. Old numbers, old favors, a former investigator who owed him, a journalist who hated being managed, a lawyer who remembered the board hearing and the way it had smelled wrong. That afternoon, Eleanor told him everything she could recall, meetings, emails, names that mattered. Evan wrote them down carefully the way he used to chart vitals. Patterns emerged, timelines, a motive that didn't need ransom to be profitable. They don't need me alive, Eleanor said. They need me silent. Then we make noise, Evan replied. That night the noise came first. A generator coughed to life beyond the fence. Headlights flared, then cut. Shadows moved with purpose. Evan shut the door and locked it, heart steadying into something colder. Maya, he said softly, remember the drill. She nodded, already moving to the back, hands sure. Eleanor followed, jaw set. The trailer shuddered as something heavy bumped the hitch. A voice called out, calm, rehearsed. Mr. Cole, last chance. Evan lifted the phone and pressed send on an email he'd queued hours earlier. Attachments flying to addresses that didn't ask permission. He pictured the journalist's face when the subject line hit. He pictured the investigator's quiet interest. Not tonight, Evan said through the door. The voice sighed. That's unfortunate. Metal screamed. Glass spiderwebbed. Evan didn't fire. He didn't have to. Sirens rose in the distance, unexpected, early, too close for comfort. The shadows scattered. Engines roared and fled. Silence returned, breathless and stunned. Evan leaned against the door, eyes closed, listening to the girls breathe behind him. They weren't expecting that, Eleanor said. No, Evan replied. They were expecting fear. Outside, blue lights washed the fence, then moved on. Evan knew what this was, a pause, not a retreat. Because when power fails quietly, it tries loudly next, and the next move would demand a witness. The sirens did not stop for them. They passed the auto yard like a rumor, close enough to raise hope, distant enough to leave doubt intact. Evan waited until the sound dissolved into the hum of the highway before he moved. Only then did he slide down the door and sit on the floor, the weight of the night finally pressing in. Maya crawled into his lap without a word. Eleanor stood nearby, arms wrapped around herself, eyes fixed on the cracked window as if the darkness might try again. They wanted to scare us, Maya said matter-of-factly. I see. Like when kids yell to make you drop your bike. Evan kissed the top of her head. That's right. But I didn't drop it, she added. Evan smiled, a tired curve of gratitude. Neither did we. Morning arrived sharp and bright, the kind that pretended nothing had happened. The yard showed no sign of the night's visit except for a bent latch on the fence and a spiderweb of glass Evan taped with steady hands. He kept his voice light while he worked, narrating small tasks so Maya wouldn't fill the silence with fear. Eleanor watched him, measuring. You planned that, she said quietly. I planned for something, Evan replied. Not everything. The calls began before noon. A local deputy came by, polite and cautious, asked questions that skimmed the surface and took notes that promised little. Evan answered cleanly. He'd learned which truths traveled best when wrapped in calm. Then the journalist called. Her voice was brisk, sharpened by curiosity and a hint of anger. I read your email, she said. You understand what you're claiming. I understand what happened to me, Evan replied. And what's happening now. I need documents. You'll have them, he said, and names. A pause. This will get ugly. Evan glanced at Maya, who was drawing chalk flowers on the asphalt, and at Eleanor, whose hands no longer trembled when she poured water. It already is. By afternoon, a black sedan rolled into the yard and stopped with deliberate care. Evan stepped out to meet it before Maya could look up. The man who emerged wore a tailored suit that belonged in glass buildings, not dirt lots. His face was familiar now. Thomas Reed. Patience polished into a weapon. You escalated, Reed said pleasantly. You trespassed, Evan replied, and threatened a child. Reed smiled thinly. You forced our hand. No, Evan said. You showed it. Reed glanced past him toward the trailer. This can still end quietly. Evan didn't raise his voice. Quiet is what you call it when no one hears the truth. Reed's eyes hardened. You're not built for this. Evan thought of the ditch, the pulse, the choice. I'm built to finish it. Reed left without another word. The sedan rolled away like it had never been there. The first article dropped that evening. It didn't scream. It didn't accuse. It asked questions that refused to be dismissed. About internal audits. About security contracts rerouted through shell companies. About a whistleblower silenced with speed and money. About a former combat medic whose license vanished the week he contradicted a report. Evan read it once. Then he closed the browser. Eleanor stood beside him. They'll counter. I know, Evan said. They always do. The counter came fast. By nightfall, Evan's face filled screens with a headline that cut deep. Disgraced medic seeks attention, claims heroism. Anonymous sources questioned his motives. Old accusations were dusted off and flung with confidence. Maya came home from the yard quiet. She set her chalk down carefully. Kids at school might say stuff tomorrow. Evan knelt. What will you say? She thought. That my dad stopped. Eleanor's eyes shone with something like pride and fear. They'll come for me next, she said. Publicly. Evan nodded. Good. She blinked. Good? They're strongest in the dark, he said. And you're done hiding. They prepared together. Evan gathered files. Eleanor rehearsed dates and names until they lined up like constellations. Maya packed her backpack with deliberate care, choosing which things mattered most. When the invitation arrived, an emergency hearing, streamed live, framed as a chance to clarify misunderstandings, Evan accepted within minutes. The night before they left, the trailer felt impossibly small and impossibly safe. Evan sat between the girls, the world pressing in through thin walls. Are you scared? Maya asked. Yes, he said honestly. Me too, Eleanor said. Evan took their hands. Fear means we're paying attention. Outside, the yard slept uneasily. Somewhere far away, engines idled and plans hardened. And as the camera lights were being tested in a room built to manage narratives, Evan understood the cost of being seen, because the truth was about to step into the open and it would demand everything. The building had been designed to feel neutral, glass, steel, pale stone, nothing that admitted guilt, nothing that invited comfort. Evan felt it the moment they stepped through the revolving doors. The temperature set just a degree too cold, the ceilings too high for voices to feel private. This was a place built to flatten people into testimony. Cameras waited like insects. Maya's hand slipped into his, small and warm. Eleanor walked on his other side, shoulders back, chin lifted, not defiant exactly, but finished with shrinking. Remember, Evan murmured, we don't rush. Eleanor nodded. We don't apologize. A staffer ushered them into a side room. Microphones sat on the table, already live. A monitor showed the hearing title scrolling in polite font. Emergency Oversight Session. Clarification of recent allegations. Clarification. Evan had learned what that word meant when Power used it. It meant control the frame before the facts could breathe. They took their seats. Across the room, Thomas Reed stood with two attorneys, all calm smiles and identical posture. Reed met Evan's eyes and offered the smallest nod, an acknowledgement, not respect. The chairwoman called the room to order. Her voice was practiced, sympathetic without commitment. We're here to understand what happened, she said, and to restore public confidence. Evan understood the translation. Say just enough to close the door. The opening statements came first, smooth, careful, heavy with phrases like isolated incident and unfortunate misunderstanding. Reed spoke of concern for Eleanor's well-being, of internal reviews already underway. He spoke of Evan as an earnest man whose past complicated his judgment. When it was Eleanor's turn, the room leaned forward. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't tremble. My name is Eleanor Vale, she said, and the syllables landed like stones. I was assaulted and left for dead on a rural highway. I survived because one man stopped. A murmur rippled. Reed's smile held. I was told this hearing would protect me, Eleanor continued. But protection that requires silence is not protection. It's custody. She laid out the timeline calmly, where she'd been, who'd arranged the transport, the meeting that went wrong. Names surfaced, dates aligned, a pattern emerged, neat and terrible. Reed objected. The chairwoman cautioned. Eleanor waited, hands folded, and continued when allowed. They say I'm confused, Eleanor said. If that's true, then explain why their version keeps changing. She finished and sat back. Evan felt the room tilt. Then it was his turn. He adjusted the microphone, remembering the ditch, the pulse, the choice. I didn't come here to be believed, he said. I came here to be precise. He spoke of the injuries he'd seen, the way they didn't match an accident. He spoke of the message on his phone, the knock at his door, the cash offered like a salve. He spoke of fear, without embellishment. They call patience a courtesy, Evan said. What they mean is time to wear you down. An attorney interrupted, voice sharp. Mr. Cole, given your history. Evan nodded once. Let's talk about it. The room stilled. My license was revoked after I contradicted a report that protected a contract, he said. I provided documents last night that show the audit trail, emails, edits, who benefited. A screen behind him lit up, files appearing one by one, timestamps marching forward like proof that refused to be rushed. The journalist's work had teeth. The investigator's notes had backbone. Reed stood. This is highly inappropriate. The chairwoman raised a hand too late. Maya shifted in her seat. May I say something? She asked, her voice clear in the hush. Evan's heart leapt. Maya. The chairwoman hesitated, then nodded, caught between optics and instinct. Maya stood on her chair so the microphone could hear her. My dad stopped, she said simply. He always does, even when it's scary. The room exhaled. No one interrupted her. When the session recessed, the hallway filled with sound, phones ringing, voices climbing. Reed brushed past Evan without looking at him. Outside, the steps were crowded with reporters. Questions flew like birds startled from wire. Eleanor answered 2, Evan answered 1. Then they moved together toward the waiting car that wasn't black. By evening, warrants were being discussed in rooms that had never said Eleanor's name aloud. By night, sponsors were issuing statements that said nothing and meant less. In the quiet of a borrowed apartment, Evan watched the girls sleep. Maya curled against the couch, Eleanor at the window, eyes closed at last. They'll hit back, Eleanor said softly, not opening her eyes. I know, Evan replied. Outside, the city hummed, restless and alive. Because when the lights don't blink and the truth steps into them, power doesn't surrender. It recalculates and prepares its final move. The backlash didn't arrive like a storm. It crept in. It came as delays, meetings postponed, calls unanswered, paperwork lost in systems designed to forget. It came as rumors reworded just enough to sound reasonable. It came as kindness sharpened into pressure. Evan felt it in the days that followed the hearing, a tightening net that didn't touch skin but restricted breath. Sponsors withdrew pending review. Officials praised transparency while scheduling nothing. The truth had stepped into the light, yes, but the light was owned by people who knew how to dim it. Eleanor paced the borrowed apartment, phone pressed to her ear, listening to silence where assurances should have been. They're waiting me out, she said. They think if they stall long enough, fatigue will do what force couldn't. Maya sat on the floor, building a tower of mismatched blocks. Towers fall if you pull the bottom, she observed. Evan watched her hands, steady, sure. Sometimes, he said, sometimes they fall because the top is too heavy. That afternoon, the break came. A notification lit Evan's phone, then another, then 10 more. A leaked memo surfaced online, selective, edited, persuasive. It painted Eleanor as unstable, Evan as manipulative. It questioned motives, implied profit, resurrected old allegations with new adjectives. The headline spread faster than facts ever did. Evan turned the phone face down. He felt the old burn of injustice flare, the familiar temptation to swing back hard, to shout louder. He breathed instead, slow and counted. They want you angry, Eleanor said. Anger makes mistakes. They want us separate, Evan replied, confused about who to protect first. A knock came at the door. This one was firm. Official. 2 agents stood in the hall, badges visible, expressions neutral enough to be dangerous. Mr. Cole, one said, we need you to answer a few questions. About what? Evan asked. An incident, the agent replied. An alleged obstruction. Eleanor stepped forward. He's represented. So am I, Evan said calmly. And I'll be present. The agents exchanged a glance. We can wait. They did not wait long. The lawyer Evan had called, quiet, precise, allergic to theatrics, arrived with a folder thick enough to slow the room. He listened. He asked for specifics. He smiled without warmth. We'll respond in writing, he said, and ushered the agents out with the politeness of a locked door. When the apartment settled again, Eleanor sank onto the couch. They're squeezing. Yes, Evan said, which means something didn't work. That night, the squeeze turned physical. Evan woke to the sound of glass breaking somewhere below, sharp, final. He was up and moving before thought arrived, heart cold and focused. He checked the rooms. Maya slept, breathing steady. Eleanor stood at the window, face pale. In the street, a car idled. A bottle lay shattered against the building's doorframe, liquid pooling dark and flammable. A message followed seconds later, delivered without a number. You could have stayed quiet. Evan photographed everything. He sent it to 3 places at once. He dialed the non-emergency line and waited on hold while the car rolled away, patient as ever. They won't kill us, Eleanor said, voice flat. Not now, not with cameras. No, Evan agreed. They'll try to make us choose. Morning brought the choice. A call from a foundation offered a settlement, public apology, funds earmarked for recovery, all contingent on a single clause. Eleanor would withdraw from further testimony. Evan would issue a statement expressing regret for misinterpretations. It's a gilded exit, Eleanor said. Comfortable, clean. Evan thought of the ditch, of the pulse that didn't know about exits. What do you want? He asked her. Eleanor didn't hesitate. I want it finished. Maya looked up from her breakfast. Finished means the bad part stops? It means it can't happen again, Evan said. Maya nodded, decision made. Then finish it. They did. Eleanor released the last files, unredacted, time-stamped, paired with corroboration that turned implication into evidence. Evan followed with an affidavit that was spare and exact, each sentence a nail placed with care. By evening, warrants were no longer discussed. They were signed. A board member resigned, another retained counsel. The memo vanished, replaced by a correction no one could miss. Phones rang with a different tone now. Evan stood at the window as dusk bled into the city, the girls behind him, the air lighter than it had been in weeks. He knew better than to call it victory. Power didn't lose gracefully. It broke what it could reach. But tonight, for the first time since the ditch, Evan allowed himself a breath that reached his ribs. Because when power misses and breaks things, it leaves fingerprints, and those fingerprints were about to be read aloud. The arrests came quietly, no sirens, no cameras waiting at dawn. Just doors opened with warrants, laptops lifted into evidence bags, men in tailored suits discovering that composure did not count as innocence. By the time the news confirmed it, the story had already moved on without asking permission. Evan watched the ticker scroll from a kitchen chair that wasn't his. The borrowed apartment felt lighter now, like a place that had served its purpose and was ready to let them go. Eleanor stood at the counter, phone pressed to her ear, answering questions with the calm of someone who had learned the cost of every word. Maya colored at the table, tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. She drew 3 figures holding hands. She always drew them that way now. Are we done? She asked without looking up. Evan considered the question carefully. We're finished with the loud part. Maya nodded. I like the quiet part better. So did he. 2 weeks later, Evan stood in a room that smelled of paper and lemon polish while a clerk slid a document across the desk. His name was printed correctly this time. The seal felt heavier than it should have. Your license is reinstated, the clerk said, neutral as weather. Evan signed once, then again, the pen steady. He didn't smile. He simply breathed. a long breath that traveled all the way down and stayed there. Outside, Eleanor waited by the car, sunglasses hiding the tired kindness in her eyes. "Congratulations," she said. "Thank you," Evan replied, "for not letting it be smaller than it was." She shrugged. "You didn't." They drove west, not to the city, not to the yard, but to a small town outside the highway's ambition, where a closed clinic sat with good bones and a bad past. Eleanor bought it without ceremony. Evan rebuilt it without spectacle. They hired carefully. They opened quietly. No one was turned away. Maya helped tape handwritten signs to the door. "Walk-ins welcome." She practiced greeting people with a seriousness that made strangers soften. When she grew tired, she curled up in a chair and watched her father work with the attention of someone learning how a future is made. On the evening they opened, the sun slid down behind low hills and painted the windows gold. The last patient left with a bandage and a thank you that felt earned. Evan locked the door and leaned against it, letting the day finish him. Eleanor stood beside him. "You could have taken the money," she said softly. "I took something else," Evan replied. She followed his gaze to Maya, who was arranging crayons by color on the counter, humming. "Integrity doesn't pay interest," Eleanor said. "No," Evan agreed. "It compounds." They sat on the clinic steps as dusk cooled the air. Fireflies blinked in the grass like shy applause. For a moment, the world felt appropriately sized. Eleanor would leave soon. Boardrooms still needed untangling, foundations still needed steering, but she stayed for dinner that night, and the next. When she hugged Maya goodbye, it was careful and complete. "Will I see you again?" Maya asked. "Yes," Eleanor said. "Often." "Good," Maya said, satisfied. "Because you're family now." Eleanor laughed, surprised into tears. Later, when the clinic lights were off and the town slept, Evan sat with his daughter on the porch. She leaned against him, warm and certain. "Dad?" she asked. "Yes, Bug." "Why did you stop that night?" He thought of the question he'd been answering since the ditch. He chose the truest thing he could carry forward. "Because someone needed help," he said, "and because doing the right thing doesn't get easier if you wait." Maya considered this. "Is that what you're leaving me?" Evan kissed her hair. "If I'm lucky." They watched the stars appear, one by one, until the sky remembered itself. Evan didn't think about what he'd gained. He thought about what he'd refused to sell. In a world that priced everything, he had given his daughter something that couldn't be taken. The proof that a father's integrity, shown when no one was watching, was the strongest inheritance he could ever leave behind. And in the quiet that followed, Evan understood at last. The story had never been about rescue. It was about becoming the kind of man a child could grow up trusting forever.